the American Literary Translators Association Mentorship Program live stream reading for 2019. It gives me great pleasure to present this year's cohort of mentees on the occasion of the culmination of their mentorship year. I'm also excited for our audience out there to hear the wonderful works of literature that they've been working on throughout this year. I'm Mira Rosenthal. I'm an ALTA board member and also a translator of Polish literature and a poet. Before we launch into the reading, I wanted to explain how our mentorship program works. It's designed to establish a really close working relationship between an established translator and emerging translator on a project of the emerging translator's choice. And mentor and mentee work together closely throughout a year, culminating in this reading that both showcases and celebrates all of the work that they've done throughout the year. For anyone interested in the program and in applying to the program, I'm happy to say that applications for our 2020 cohort of mentees is now open. And it's got a slightly shifted timeline so that this reading will be happening at the American Literary Translators Association conference next year. There are 6 mentorships from non-language specific, non-genre specific projects to Catalan, Russian, Korean, and Chinese. You can find out more information using the link provided in the description for our event today or going to the ALTA website. I'm also really proud to say that this year marks the 5th anniversary of our mentorship program. And we at ALTA are currently in the midst of our fall campaign to raise funds both for our mentorship program and also for our Travel Fellows program. Both of those programs are really designed to support and foster emerging translators at a crucial moment in their careers. So we're in the midst of trying to raise $10,000 to support our work in fostering emerging translators. Any type of donation helps, so please consider making a donation using the link provided in our description. Of course, a program like this would not be possible without our wonderful mentors. And I want to take a moment just to recognize all of the volunteer work that they do in supporting these emerging translators. They are Marianne Schwartz in Russian prose, Bill Johnston in Polish prose, Madhu Kaza in non-language specific prose, and Kareem James Abu Zaid in non-language specific poetry. In addition, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Polish Cultural Institute in New York, the Russian Federation Institute for Literary Translation, and Amazon Crossing. Finally, I want to thank our invaluable staff members who work ceaselessly throughout the year in making sure that this program runs smoothly. And that's Kelsey Vanada, our ALTA's program manager, board member Sebastian Schulman, and of course, previous board member Allison Charette, who dreamed up this crazy idea in the first place and got it going in 2015. So all of these organizations and individuals really are instrumental in fostering cultural dialogue and continuing to be cultural ambassadors, making sure that we have future cultural ambassadors by supporting those who are just coming up in the field. Today, I'm excited to present 3 of our 4 mentees from this year. They have quite a variety of projects, so I'm excited to hear their work and also to hear a little bit about their experience in working with their mentors this year. It's quite an impressive bunch. I will be touching on their accomplishments as I introduce them in turn during the reading. Finally, I want to welcome and invite anyone out there listening to join our conversation after the reading during our Q&A. If you have a YouTube channel, you can post questions and comments on YouTube, or you can always email the email listed on the event at racheldaum@literarytranslators.org. So without any further ado, I'm happy to present Fiona Bell. Fiona is a scholar and translator of Russian literature. Her most recent translation project, which she worked on during her mentorship, is Stories, a memoir by contemporary filmmaker Natalia Mishnaninova. Fiona is currently working as a Fulbright English teacher assistant in Ulyanovsk, Russia. Next fall, she will begin a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures at Yale University. So welcome, Fiona.
Thank you. So I am going to read the very first part of the second chapter of this project. Basically, I discovered Mishaninova's memoir online a little bit over a year ago. It was originally posted as a series of Facebook posts on her page, and I think the style makes that kind of clear, that this is something that upon first glance was just dashed off as a Facebook post, but really it's a wonderful window into what it was like to grow up in Russia in the 90s. Okay, so this chapter is called Literary Exhibitionism. When I was 14, I read the diary of Laura Palmer and decided if I didn't start writing my own diary, then no one would ever know how I lived and died. And at 14, I wanted to be killed in a tasteful, high-profile way. I bought a notebook, wrote the date on the first page, and began like Laura Palmer, Dear Diary. After that, I wasn't sure what to do. I had to introduce myself somehow. I wrote something like, My name is Natasha. I'm 14 years old and I'm in 9th grade. I do sports like kayaking and canoeing. And I have a huge crush on Sasha Shipulin. He's going to be a kayaking champion one day. But he doesn't like me back. He's so cute and I have zits. Mom said I should bake him pirashki because the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. I'm learning to bake pirashki made from yeast dough in the oven. I reread this. I didn't like what I'd written for 2 reasons. First of all, it reminded me of a school essay, and that wasn't what I was going for. Secondly, from the very first page, I described myself in this way as if I were hideous and fat, and I wasn't. I did have zits, but my friend Marina said they went away as soon as you fucked a guy. She had already fucked a guy and had verified this personally. Her zits had disappeared. That's why I didn't want to immortalize my zits or those stupid pirashki, because all that would change soon. And besides, comparing my first few lines to Laura Palmer's diary, I realized all mine was good for was a laugh. So I ripped that page out. I didn't want to write about mundane life, describing every single day, what I did, who said what to me, what happened. That was child's play. I wanted to write about my inner world, about what excited me. The diary should start in a mysterious tone, I thought. On a new page, I wrote something like, I am Natalie. I am 14 years old, but already mature enough. I like what I'd written about how I was already mature enough. It wasn't clear what I was mature enough for, but it was good. A promising start. I continued. My love overwhelms me. No need to mention that it was unrequited. My beloved is a handsome man with sensual lips. Yesterday, while returning from practice, no need to say what sport, it lent some mystery. As I walked through the park, my heart began pounding. I sensed that he was gaining on me, my demon, my dark angel. I turned around, the wind ruffled my blonde hair, and I saw him approaching quickly. What came next I won't describe here, but it was dizzying. For a long time after, my lips were sore and itchy, and his scent lingered on my hands. He walked me to the bus and then retreated into the night. I await my meeting with him, my fantomas, tomorrow. I was pleased with my writing. Very. It was like the beginning of one of those novels with detailed sex scenes. I'd read one when I was 12. It was called something like The Whore of Venice. And thanks to that book, I learned everything about Venice, mastered some Italian phrases, and stole a few metaphors about copulation. I didn't want to call sex sex. Stuff like the unicorn burst into the valley seemed more literary and highbrow to me at the time. Now satisfied with the first page of my diary, I moved on. Although, of course, none of it bore any relation to reality. One evening, after practice ended, I paced outside the boys' locker room for a long time, waiting for Shipulin to leave. Eventually, someone scared me off. I walked towards the park and decided to sit in the reeds by the water and watch the road. When I saw Shipulin a ways away, I would sneak out from the reeds and start walking in front of him slowly. He was faster than me, so he would catch up and we would start talking, and then he would walk me to the bus. I'd used this trick a few times before, and it had worked. Once, Shipulin not only walked me to the bus, but even bought me a meat pie. But that evening, I climbed too far into the reeds. It was early spring, wet, and my sneakers slid into the smelly, sticky green muck. I burst into tears and couldn't stop crying for a while. It wasn't just that it was wet and disgusting, it also smelled really bad. Then Shipulin appeared down the road, not alone, but with 3 boys from his team. I had to sit in the reeds because I couldn't let them see me in those sneakers. They passed me without noticing me. It was already dark, and I trudged to my bus, still sobbing. But I was ashamed to write about that in my diary. Anyone who read it wouldn't want to keep reading and wouldn't find out what a gutsy, proud, mysterious blonde beauty I was. By the way, I wasn't a blonde. I've had mousy hair since I was born. But in my diary, I'd already said I had blonde hair and had written that scene where the wind ruffles it. I liked all that. Later, I peroxided my hair and became a bona fide blonde. But this is how the era of lies and diary writing began. I reveled in my literary maneuvers, stole from books when I couldn't find the right words, and fabricated facts and experiences. But then the diary was perfect, almost as good as Laura Palmer's. In fact, I also copied one of her entries in its entirety. It fit my situation, a big evil grown-up who tortures me and wants to kill me. That was all true. In my life, there was a big evil grown-up who murdered my childhood, my mom's second husband, my second stepfather. But I was so scared to write about him directly. I couldn't imagine some future biographer finding my diary and reading the whole truth about what that man did to me. No, 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 anything but that. I was incapable of that kind of openness. I'd rather my future biographers read snippets of Laura Palmer's diary. That's also why I lied shamelessly about my first time. I described my first sexual encounter in detail, using metaphors from The French Love Potion and A Slave of Love. I reveled in romanticizing and even demonizing myself as a femme fatale. And none of this had any connection to me or to my first time. In the diary, there was someone else, and it was all consensual, unhurried, and sweet. Basically, the diary entry wasn't humiliating. It was nice. Elevating the reader, you could say, to the heights of goodness and love. An alternate reality, a sweet dream, not a word of harsh truth. A few days later, on account of Murphy's Law, my mother read my diary. Standing over a batch of uncooked pelmeni in the kitchen, she randomly struck up a conversation about what happens between a man and a woman when they love each other, blah, blah, blah. I realized right away that she'd read my diary, and I cornered her. She confessed, "Yes, I read it. I have to ask, is it true? You're not a virgin anymore? You're really seeing that good-looking boy you wrote about?" She was talking about Sasha Shipulin. "Yes," I replied, "it's all true." We shed a few tears over my lost innocence. I said I wanted to marry him, and my mother approved, which was weird because I was 14. She clearly realized that I was mature enough, especially since I'd said so on the first page of my diary. After moonlighting as a young bride-to-be who'd succumbed to love and passion, I went to my room, locked the door, and started rereading my diary. No, it's all good. I didn't give anything away, not a word of truth. Phew. What would have happened to my mom if I'd written the truth? I really wonder, would she have killed him? Me? Herself? Gone crazy? Become a religious nut? Cried? Stopped loving me? Or maybe she would have protected me, hugged me, taken me far away, hidden me. No, not likely. Doubtful. Even imagining what would have happened if my mother had found out the truth, it's unbearable. Why, though? It's all in the past. Water under the bridge. I was wise and cunning. I knew sooner or later a reader would arrive on the scene, and I wanted to make a good impression. I got a little carried away. So after Shipullin broke up with me, not broke up with me really, just stopped walking me to the bus, said he didn't feel like it anymore. For a humiliatingly long time, I wrote him notes and called his house, chatting with his mom for hours about her problems. I even went over to see her, hoping to catch Shipullin, but he never showed. I couldn't write about how I was unsuccessfully stalking Shipullin, so I spruced up the story. Fate has separated us, but I'll always remember you, my angel. The impossibility of touching you drives me crazy. You're so close, gazing at me again with those dark eyes, although his eyes were actually blue. And I know you want to tell me something. Quiet, hush, don't say anything. We are victims of fate. I know you suffer as much as I, and so on. You get the idea. In the diary, I didn't give a reason for our separation, and that bothered me. My reader would never forgive such a blind spot. So then I wrote, I'm dying. They told me it's leukemia. I forgive you. I'm letting you go. You don't have to love me. Be happy. They gave me 2 years to live, and I will love you to my very last breath. I really liked illness as a backstory. It explained everything, and I came off really selfless and magnanimous. I even wished other people knew about my illness. For some reason, I told Marina that I had 2 years left to live, and Marina told Sasha Shipullin. Sasha Shipullin lost his shit and told his mom. His mom lost her shit and called my mom. That's it. I was fucked. Thank you.
What a fabulous reading. Thank you so much. I love the way you read that, and it just comes alive even more. It makes me wonder how much reading out loud is part of your translation process. So maybe we'll touch on that in the Q&A.
Cool.
To get something so fluently conversational is really a feat. So fabulous to hear. I'll also be curious to hear in the Q&A. I know that you wrote a play and staged it, a play about two wonderful Russian poets, Marina Tsvetaeva and Anna Akhmatova.
Yeah.
And I think that the theatricality both comes through in this piece and also in your reading. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I now have the pleasure of introducing Mirgul Kali. Mirgul's translations of short stories by Kazakh writers have appeared in Tupelo Quarterly, Asymptote, and Electric Literature. She's currently translating Kokbalak, a novel by Kazakh writer Mukhtar Magoin. Please welcome Mirgul.
Thank you, Mira. So the book I'm translating, it tells a life story of a man named Toksaba, a gifted musician who had been extensively trained in his childhood and youth in the traditional Kazakh art of performing cues, which are short solo compositions played on a dombra, musical instrument that resembles a lute. However, the beginning of Toksaba's career of a professional kyusha, highly skilled musician who often travels around to perform at various social gatherings and celebrations, coincides with the turbulent political events in the neighboring Russia, the revolution, and the Bolsheviks' rise to power. The consequences of these events disrupt the nomadic lifestyle of Kazakh people, of which Toksaba was an essential element. As a result, Toksaba spends most of his life toiling on a collective farm. And as he gets older, he becomes increasingly dismayed by the poor performance quality and limited selection of the cues that are played at local concerts and on the radio. So the excerpt I'm going to read is near the end of the novel. It's set in early 50s, late 60s of the last century, and is preceded by a chapter in which Toksaba travels from a rural village where he lives to the capital of Kazakhstan, with an idea to have some of a couple of hundred of cues that he plays recorded. In the city, he's met by a young female musician, Kamash, who helps him get a room at a hotel and introduces him to Zholdobaev, her boss, a scholar, and the head of the folk music department at the National Academy of Arts. Zholdobaev then invites him to participate at a concert during which Toksaba manages to ruin his chances of recording his cues by publicly challenging Zholdobaev's knowledge of Kazakh cue music. And here it goes. He didn't feel like getting out of bed that morning. He lay awake, feeling weary and hollow. On days like this, when he felt anguished and confused, he would normally reach for his instrument, but this time he didn't even want to look at it. His mind wavered, and he forgot what he'd been thinking about a minute ago. He was vaguely aware of the stiffness slowly enveloping his body. He finally rose in the evening and went downstairs to have some tea, then returned to his desolate hotel room and sat on the bed, motionless, till midnight. When he woke up the next day, he decided to wait for Kamash to visit him and then leave the city. He didn't have to wait for long. There was a gentle knock on the door, but instead of Kamash, he saw Zholdobaev enter the room. Zholdobaev was unusually courteous this time. He bowed respectfully and held both his hands out in greeting. Then he pulled out and unfolded a crumpled newspaper with a review of their concert the night before last. The concert proved to be a big hit. "I didn't come here to gather praise," Toksaba said, shrugging his shoulders. Zholdobaev stared at him. Then what had he come for? To have all the cues that he knew recorded. Zholdobaev thought for a minute. The academy may not be able to fund this. He had to explain to the old man, who looked at him in confusion, that there wouldn't be much money in it for him. Small change, if any. The remark infuriated Toksaba, but today it seemed Zholdobaev had resolved to be exceedingly patient with him. He spoke softly. It would take many weeks, even months, to record the cues, to notate them. Could he afford to stay in the city that long? Toksaba held his gaze on him, wondering what could have made a self-satisfied man like Zholdobaev to stoop to his level today. He asked him to read the paper aloud. The glowing review praised Zholdobaev to the skies. A prominent researcher of Kazakh music, expert, luminary, hero. But that was not all. He learned that he, the 60-year-old Toksaba, had been discovered, in fact birthed, by Zholdobaev himself. He was no longer the Kyushu who had been known to the entire Arka region in his youth. No, it was Zholdobaev who had just made him famous for the first time. The review went on to laud Toksaba's skill and talent, but he couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "You're a remarkable man who holds a treasure trove of old Kazakh cues in his memory," Zholdobaev began carefully. "You can be quick-tempered at times, which makes our communication difficult. But that's all right. Art and ego often go hand in hand, and your age and experience make up for this. So I'm not offended. I'll do my best to find the money to have all your cues recorded." He talked about a recent invention, a clever apparatus that could record sound in no time at all. Toksaba didn't quite catch its name, but gathered that it was similar to a gramophone. The old man cheered up a little, and the conversation became somewhat amicable. But Zholdobaev kept trying his patience. He insisted that some of the things Toksaba had said at the concert were inaccurate, and from an academic perspective completely unfounded. According to research, musicians who could independently compose music appeared only in the early 19th century. It was then that the genre of cue evolved and flourished. All that had come before that were folk cues. "Who created those old cues then?" exclaimed Toksaba. "Well, people, obviously. So thousands of people got together and said, let's compose a cue. Joldabaev smiled. Of course not. Someone would come up with a melody first. A shepherd, a hired hand, in other words, a representative of the people. Well, why can't that representative of yours have a name? Say, Bayjgut. Joldabaev began weaving a long and convoluted explanation, which Toksaba didn't care to understand. Joldabaev cried in exasperation. This turns the established academic theory of the development of traditional Kazakh music upside down. What would people say? They'll tear me to pieces. And what do we do with Kurmangazi and Tettimbet, the 19th century founders of the art of cue? They stay where they are. How could the olden day musicians hurt them? As a matter of fact, those founders of yours must have looked up to and learned from the old masters. Where do you think their skill and virtuosity came from? They couldn't come to an agreement. In the end, Toksaba gave up. Have it your way, he said. He would play Bayjgut's, Saranyaz, and Kerbala's cues as folk cues. Saymars, Dojrans, Alshagurs, Aidos, Kwanduks, and Besimbis cues too. They were sons of the Kazakh folk after all. As long as their work was remembered, all was well. Joldabaev lit a cigarette and sat back in his chair, savoring the first few puffs. We'll have to go on television, he said. But don't forget, I do the talking and you do the playing. Are we clear on this? Toksaba promised him that he would keep his mouth shut. We don't have much time, Joldabaev said. He took out 2 cigarettes and offered one to Toksaba. The television people are revising their programming to fit us in. Keep in mind, this is much bigger than our concert the other night. Thousands of people, all of Kazakhstan will be watching. He sat smoking in silence for a couple of minutes. We'll have to prepare, rehearse a lot. It's a great responsibility. Toksaba felt the weight of this responsibility on his shoulders. All right, old man, said Joldabaev, throwing the cigarette stub onto an ashtray as he stood up, once again assuming the role of the man in charge. Get your dombra. Toksaba leapt to his feet excitedly, grabbed the instrument, and began settling on the bed with his legs crossed when Joldabaev came up to him and said, Wait, old man. We'll have to start with a proper sitting position. You can't hold a dombra like that. Toksaba looked at him in bewilderment. You can't hold a dombra like that, Joldabaev said, repeated slowly, articulating each word. You're going on television. Raise your chin. Yes, like this. Bring the dombra's body close to your stomach. It's not a shovel. You have to hold it gently and gracefully. Right then, Toksaba exploded. Who do you think you are? What right do you have to lecture me? I was an apprentice to the legendary Qazai himself. He never took issue with the way I sat. I played before all kinds of people. They found no fault in my playing. I traveled across half of the country, from Karaotkil in the north to Yirin Kaburga in the south, from Old Tau in the west to Altai Mountains in the east, to compete with the best dombra players. Not one of them could beat me. I met only one person who knew the dombra better than I did, Aitan Sal, and he never looked down on me. How do you, a tone-deaf oaf who can't tell a wolf's howl from a goat's bleating, dare tell me what to do? Kamash saw him off to the train. She didn't say a word to him. In later years, Toksaba spent many hours mulling over the events of the ill-fated trip, but could think of no other way of ending it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel like we need an applause track because that's what your readings are coming across so effectively, and I'm already pulled right into that story. I want to read the rest. This book needs to be in the world. I know that there's not a lot of Kazakh literature translated into English, and a lot of what's out there has been translated through Russian intermediate translation. So during the Q&A, I'll be really curious to hear about what it means for you to be translating directly from Kazakh. Really beautiful, thank you. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Jennifer Kellogg. Jennifer is the Academic Programs Director at the Greek American Foundation. She holds a PhD in Modern Languages and Literatures from the ULB in Belgium. Jennifer lives in Rochester, New York, and she says that she's looking forward to welcoming the Alta community when we have our annual conference there in November. I'm looking forward to being welcomed and to inviting anyone and everyone out there listening to join us for our conference this November. So without any further ado, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mira, and thank you to the entire Alta team and for my mentor, Kareem, for helping me get to this point, and I'm looking forward to sharing my work with you. I'll be reading from George Safaris' Book of Exercises 2. George Safaris is Greece's first Nobel Prize winning poet. He won the Nobel in Literature in 1963, and he lived from 1900 to 1971. And mainly he was a diplomat for the Greek government through both world wars, the Greek Civil War, the Cyprus crisis, and the theme of war is quite significant in his poetry. Book of Exercises 2 was published posthumously in 1976, and most of the poems in this volume are drawn from the poet's diaries that he kept meticulously. So we have another diaristic theme today. So he kept these diaries throughout his travels and his vocation as a diplomat. And the work that's in Book of Exercises 2 are things that were mainly unfinished or political satire pieces that he was not comfortable releasing during his lifetime, or work that formed the basis for some of his more well-known poetry. So most of this work has never been translated into English before, and I will read 3 poems. The first 2 are some of his later poems written in the 1960s, and the third poem comes from his diaries during the time of the Greek Civil War. The first poem is Letter to Rex Warner, a resident alien of Storrs, Connecticut, for his 60th birthday. When we met in the soccer field that had experienced brazen slaughter, you were talking about hunting wild geese in the despot of hermaphrodites. I was returning from a marble stadium where the wounded marathon runner who volunteered for the war saw slingshots sailing through blood. This is how I attuned to you and we became friends. We went to a country ruined by war so badly that even the children's dolls were crippled. The light was so quick and strong, it chewed through everything and turned it to bones. We strolled among bicycles and paper airplanes. Although we noticed the colors, our conversation strayed towards that unhealed terror. Many years passed, and I found you again in soil teeming with flowers, where sometimes the poison ivy lurks, where studious young people learn to pronounce scripture and love's labyrinth. You always honored Homer and his generation. A squirrel scampered up a giant tree, higher and higher, a spasming curlicue, and you watched him, laughing. Our life is constant separation and the most challenging presence. Now, in the tightly woven metropolis, I think of you again. Everything is television, and it's hard to touch anything up close. Within the heat of the electric night, within a pristine loneliness of the sea's depths, the illuminated skyscrapers display their shiny windows like the skin of a huge sea creature as it flings itself into the foam. The multicolored nation that fills the skyscrapers, immeasurable, pushing and shoving, departed about this time for other pleasures and agonies. They were emptied out, not a soul remained. Like the nests of that sparrow, the one dubbed a lover of company, Phileteris socius, the multicellular one. You see them in thorny acacia shrubs, or in a museum if you're looking for them. I rued the vine, murmured the prophet Jonah while gazing at the great Nineveh. This phrase reminds me of ecstatic visions that assembled in his daily work, bulls and horses with gaping mouths and a switchblade tongue. The resurrection, a fissure in reality, like the expat El Greco speaking in a tongue unintelligible to all. Or that sculptor who saw the sky as red and battled with that insatiable space where the statue crumbled in his hands, smaller and tinier until nothing. Many years have sunk into the depths since the time when a young man named Megacles had an athlete's flask draped on his left arm, and in his 3 fingers held a pomegranate and dedicated it tenderly to Persephone. Now on your 60th, I can't offer you anything besides this useless twittering. Nonetheless, I'll say that the company-loving sparrows saved me and goaded me into their thick herd. And this is the second poem, The Cats of St. Nicholas. Yet still the emotional instinct, self-taught from within, intones a dirge of the avenging spirit, without a lyre, without having at all the beloved audacity of hope. Aeschylus's Agamemnon. The feline cape is now visible, said my friend the captain, while pointing out a low beach in the fog. The shore was empty on Christmas Day, and far off to the west is where the wave gave birth to Aphrodite. They call the place Greek Rock. 3/4 winds to the left. In another time, I lost a cat who had the eyes of Salome, and then one named Ramazan who held death's gaze for days on end in the snow of Anatolia and in the frozen sun, right in the eyes for days on end, that little household god. Don't pause, traveler. 3/4 winds to the left, murmured the helmsman. Perhaps my friend is retired now, no longer at sea, shut up in a small house with icons and seeking the windows behind iron grills. The ship's bell rang, a piece of our commonwealth that was lost, but revived when it found compassion from a bygone era. The captain broke the silence. It's strange, this bell, on this day, reminds me of that other bell, the one at the monastery. He told the story of a monk, half crazed, driven by dreams. During the time of the great drought, 40 years it lasted, the whole island was ruined. Lots of people died and snakes proliferated. Millions of snakes filled that cape, each one thick like a foot and poisonous. At that time, the monastery of St. Nicholas was held by the monks of St. Basil, and they couldn't work the fields or graze herds. The cats they fed saved them. Each morning, a bell would ring and the crew left for battle. All day, they would pound on each other until the signal for the evening meal. After dinner, the bell rang again, and they went out for the night's warfare. They say it was a miracle to behold. One was limping, another bow-legged, others missing a nose, an ear, fur shredded. And so with 4 bells a day, months went by, years, ages and more ages. Fairly, stubborn, and constantly wounded, they exterminated the snakes. But in the end, they died too. They couldn't handle so much poison. Like a sunken ship, nothing was left behind in the foam. Not a meow, not a bell. Line. What more could they do, the poor things, battling and imbibing the venomous snake blood day and night? Eons of poison, generations of poison. Line, echoed the helmsman in indifference. And this is poem number 3. It's called Argo. Argo. I learned my fables next to boats, not from travelers, nor from mariners, nor from the others who waited expectantly on the quays, disembarked, perpetually searching their pockets for a cigarette. The faces of boats inhabit my life. Some of them see with one eye like the Cyclops, motionlessly upon the sea's mirror. Others move like sleepwalkers, dangerously. Still others were taken by the sleep of the deep, wood, ropes, sails, chains, and all. In the cool little garden house, among the cottonwood and eucalyptus trees, close to the rusty windmill, close to the yellow fountain with one lonely carp, in the cool little house with the aroma of reeds, I found a boat's compass. It revealed the atmospheric angels who occupy the noonday silence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And just to let out the applause, a comment that we got in from Samantha Schnee, wonderful, wonderful readings. Thank you all so much. And Jenny, there were a couple of lines that just stood out for me because I know that you've described your dissertation on Seferis as thinking about how his poetry articulates ideas and images of homeland. And I just love these lines. Our life is constant separation and the most challenging presence. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to, I want to invite anyone out there listening to join our Q&A. Feel free to post your comments and questions in the comments section on our live stream reading. But first, I wanted to hear from each of you one experience in particular that really stood out in working with your mentor this year. You have very different projects, and I know that perhaps you were working in different ways. So anything in particular that you'd like to share about that experience?
I can talk about it. So I learned during this mentorship that, like many beginners in literary translation, I translate quite closely to the original text. There was one moment when my mentor, Madhu Kaza, suggested a change that seemed to me like a drastic deviation from the original, to the point that I felt physically uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So we talked about it, and my mentor said something that she kept telling me throughout the mentorship, that as it's not always possible to retain it all, the style, the story, the culture in translation. So I have to constantly ask myself, what choice am I making? Am I going to be faithful and translate the text as it is because it has value in its entirety, or I'm going to make the text more accessible and engaging, but at the expense of leaving some information out? It took me a while to really grasp this concept, but gradually I think I've become a little bit bolder. And it's interesting that actually stepping away from the original text could make your translation much better.
That's a really interesting comment, which relates to a question that we've received from Kelsey Venata, who's wondering how much knowledge of this Kazakh instrument was necessary to translate the novella. Did you have knowledge of it beforehand, or what kind of research process did you go through? And that, relates to this question of how to negotiate cultural information that might not be clear for the English reader.
Yeah, so dombura is something that almost all people have in their houses in Kazakhstan. Even if people don't play, they have it anyway, because people often gather together and one of the guests will say, do you have a dombura? And they would play during a social gathering. But I do not play an instrument. So for me, I did have to do a lot of research. I read quite a few books on the Kui and dombura, Kui music, dombura. I looked at the terms. So yeah, I had to do quite a bit of research, and I think it's still insufficient. I still have to dig some more. I'm also hoping to meet with some experts in music. And actually, yeah, it was a challenge because there were some ways in the book. I have to explain the cues, the story behind each cue. And sometimes I couldn't understand what it means because some musical terms were used, but I did research and I was able to translate that way, I guess.
Interesting. For Jenny and Fiona, any particular experiences that really stand out for you during your mentorship?
Well, I had never gotten the chance to work with either a professor, a teacher, a mentor who specifically had experience translating from Russian to English. So that was such a gift and also a very new experience for me. So Marianne Schwartz really helped me navigate some of the common issues with Russian to English translation, especially verb aspect and certain tics in Russian. In my text especially, there was a lot more exclamation points than we typically use in English, whether because of the author's own voice or its social media origins. I don't know. That was interesting though, because even in the US now we have a debate about the gendered usage of that, I don't know, the exclamation point. So that's something I thought about a lot. What about you, Jenny?
Yeah, like both of you, this was my first experience working with someone who's a professional poetry translator or has done a lot of poetry translation. And I'm coming from academia, and so this was really my first experience in literary translation in general, outside of my dissertation. And my mentor really helped me make choices on poems that were drafts, that were kind of unfinished. You know, it's hard to know what the poet might have intended to do with it. And so Kareem translating from Arabic, where punctuation and style is very different in English, really helped me understand how to make those choices in English and take a stand on the type of voice and style I wanted for this work. So that has really been the focus of our time together. And it's been tremendously helpful. And like Mira, you know, like I said, I was coming from academia, and Greek, I would say, is a particularly academically invested language because of the way that modern Greek is so similar to ancient Greek. And the poet plays on the 2,500 year history of his language in his work. And it's hard not to take a academically faithful approach to that tendency. And so my mentor really helped me understand that I could create a new creative work out of this. And I really look forward to finishing the manuscript and sharing that with the world. So
we're looking forward to reading it. And your comments relate to a question that I've received via email from Rachel Dahm. She's wondering, you talked a little bit about the original Greek and kind of things that you were negotiating there a little bit. She's wondering in particular about navigating line breaks. What were some of the specific things that you were having to consider in bringing it into English?
Mm-hmm. So many of these poems have quite long lines, and I've broken them up a bit. And that took me some time to develop the confidence, but I have broken up long lines. I have switched sentences around and really tried to remain faithful to my vision for the poem, which is, as we all know, very challenging as an emerging translator. And then the other thing too is that this poet doesn't use a lot of commas. And that was one thing that I worked through with Kareem, that he really felt that the work needed more commas. And so I developed my own approach to commas. And the other thing about line breaks is that the poet uses many semicolons to divide thoughts. And so I had to navigate that. And that's part of my line break strategy. So
I love this. This is a window into the translator's world, thinking about exclamation points and commas and semicolons. You know, suddenly an hour has gone by just thinking about punctuation.
yeah, I mean, I kept asking Kareem, like, do you think semicolons belong in poetry? It's like a philosophical question about semicolons. So.
Yeah. So I'm also wondering we've heard a little bit about some of the challenges of your particular texts in relation to punctuation, but I'm wondering about other challenges. What was the most challenging for you for these particular texts? And if Mirgil, if you'll permit me to circle back around to my question, I'm in particular curious to hear about what it meant for you to be translating directly from Kazakh, knowing that that has not happened very often from Kazakh to English.
So the challenges? Well, actually, the challenge was not to get the words and terms right for me, but my biggest challenge was capturing the narrative voice and tone. So that was the main focus of my work with the mentor. And I also had struggled with keeping it consistent. So, for example, there were some chapters where the voice, some chapters in the novel would begin with this detached voice of an old, wise storyteller who spoke in long, ornate sentences, but then it would suddenly shift to this other narrator who was less authoritative and more compassionate toward the characters and protagonists. So I spent a lot of time first trying to smooth it out, make this difference less jarring. And then my mentor suggested just to think about who were the people or persons behind these voices and what they were trying to do. And that really helped me to I guess understand. I reread the novel to see if this old storyteller appears anywhere. He only appeared like a couple of times, and I think he was just trying to get into the novel in the beginning. So one of the options that I'm considering, I'm still working on it, is to maybe drop this storyteller mode and just be normal, because it feels much smoother. And the other thing was keeping the tone consistent. That was an interesting discovery for me, because and it turned out to be a matter of reading each original sentence and comparing it with its translation. And I noticed that I completely changed the tone when I would try to rearrange the sentence. When I was trying to work out the syntactic issues, I would just completely lose the tone. It wasn't the same anymore. So that was a big discovery for me, really helpful.
Really interesting. I'm wondering, Fiona, if you have had similar wrestles. Your piece is very tonally driven.
Right.
What was your thinking there?
Yeah, I share a lot of experiences with Mira in trying to find the right tone, because you have the narrator as a woman in her 30s looking back at her childhood, but then you also have this child's voice, which you heard a little bit of today. In addition to that, her mother is probably the most important character besides the author herself in the memoir. So I tried to create a pretty unified tone for her, also for her stepfather. And it's funny because as I was getting to the end of the project, I got a chance to meet with a family friend, Eileen Stevens, who works as a voice actor, and she records audiobooks for kids, even romance books. She does everything. And we worked together on me reading my translation draft out loud and coming up with different actual voices in my mouth for these characters. And that really helped me as I was editing later to think about the word choice. I also had to do a lot of research or buffing up on my contemporary Russian slang because, these were originally Facebook posts that then got published as a book. And so I wanted to make sure that I was finding contemporary equivalents. It's also interesting because the author is in her 30s, and often she's using slang that someone her age would use in Russia. But rather than trying to approximate the slang of an older millennial, I just used my own voice. So that was a choice.
We have a wonderful question from Elizabeth Jacquette for you, Fiona. Following up on that idea of voice, can you tell us about how you negotiated translating a narrator who is herself consciously experimenting with tone and voice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is probably for all of us, the greatest strength of the piece you're translating is probably the biggest challenge as a translator often. So Misha Ninova definitely experiments with her voice, kind of shape shifts. Sometimes she's being funny, sometimes she's being tongue-in-cheek, and then immediately it'll be very sincere and just kind of the dregs of her experience, really painful memories. And so I tried to leave space for those quick shifts. So kind of not to make decisions that would, well, I guess kind of like grease the hinges of those shifts so that the reader could be surprised like I was. Yeah.
So really controlling that pacing, being aware of that pacing needing to be kind of a sudden shift. And that definitely came through in your reading. It's also interesting to hear that you were consciously aware of voice and that embodied aspect of the language, perhaps coming from your experience working on the stage a little bit. That's really fascinating. Jenny, I'm wondering what you felt was the most challenging experience for you in working with Seferis's poetry.
I'd say I'm still in the middle of it. This last month of the mentorship, I'm diving into all of the rhyming poetry that's included in this volume, and much of the rhyming poetry is also satire. So during, let's say, a difficult political negotiation during World War II, Seferis would just satirize the whole thing in his diary. And so obviously Greek rhythm is different, and the Greek language lends itself quite differently than English to rhymes. So that's probably the most challenging thing for me, is I'm trying to develop a consistent way of working with it that also is in keeping with the tone and style that I've adopted for the other types of poems in this volume. And I'm still in the middle of it, but it's fun when I can get out of the stress of it, of trying to be faithful to the original and playful. Because you see, this poet he has a lot of heaviness generally in his style and in his language. But in this volume, you also see his playfulness and all the ways that he was trying to send up the seriousness of Greek diplomatic negotiations. So that's been the most challenging aspect, trying to bridge those two different styles in one.
What a fascinating parallel to what Fiona was just saying about negotiating those shifts from the humor to the sudden seriousness. And yes, rhyme, translating rhyme and dealing with the way in which rhyme comes across in contemporary English is one of the most challenging things when translating poetry. Interesting. I'm wondering if any of you have any advice for anyone out there considering applying to the mentorship program.
Yeah, so I'd like to start and give my enthusiastic plug for putting your application forward. For me, this project would have sat in a drawer, metaphorically, on my computer forever if I hadn't taken the risk to apply, and it's been nothing but positive. And this, I hope this reading has shown all of you out there that the mentorship really gives you a strong platform to develop yourself as a literary translator. So don't hesitate. That's my advice.
Yay, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that that was your experience. And hopefully it does give a platform and a boost up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. This was one of my best intellectual experiences and collaborative experiences, which is saying a lot because I do a lot of theater. Theater is very collaborative. But working with Marian for a whole year, I just really enjoyed it. I think she's going to be a mentor next year for Russian prose. And so I really encourage anyone interested in that to apply because she's just incredibly smart and has a great sense of humor and just very supportive of especially contemporary Russian voices. And yeah, I guess one piece of advice is I saw that this was an opportunity. Up until then, I had only translated Russian poetry. I thought, no, it's a totally different type of translation. I would not be qualified to do that. I don't even know if I'm interested in prose. But I just kind of found a project that I was excited about, and I applied specifically with that project. So I encourage you to find something specific and just kind of go out on a limb. If you're not sure, I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
So even choosing something that you feel like you are not sure you're qualified to translate, something specific like that could be a great moment to seek the advice and help of a mentor and get into it together as a collaboration. That's really great. Muriel, did you want to add anything about specific advice for those applying to the mentorship program?
Yeah. So I would say that it's good to be proactive, to be ready to be proactive, and to put a lot of work on your own as opposed to expecting to be led and having everything explained to you. Because I think you can have only so many meetings in a year, and each meeting lasts 1 to 2 hours. So you can't, you have to look at the text, but also talk about other bigger things. And there's not enough time. So sometimes the a mentor could say, work on the tone, but she may not explain to you how to do it exactly. So it's up to you sometimes to look up, because next time you come up back for the text and she'll say, work on the tone again, and we'll be looking at all other things. So be ready to put up some work, and yeah, don't give up, even if you're busy and you're not able to translate as much as you want to. Translate at least a few paragraphs and make an effort to meet regularly with your mentor, because this way you get an opportunity to get advice and also to really dig into the text.
Yeah, and I like that. I like ending on that reminder that probably 90% of this work is showing up, right? Actually doing the work, sitting there at the screen, pulling the thing out of the drawer and looking at it again. Part of what the mentorship provides is just that, a reminder to show up and do the work, and be that you have this little bit of accountability built into to the system. Any other questions that you might like to ask each other?
I have a question for Muriel. So you translated a text about musicians, so a type of artist. And I was wondering if through translating this text or getting to know these characters very well, did they as musicians teach you anything about your artistic practice of translation?
That's a difficult question. Let me think. I don't know about learning about translation, but I did learn a lot more about the culture of my own people and the music, especially. A lot of compositions I mentioned in the book, so I had to listen to them. And I had to try to understand them because sometimes they are accompanied with the stories, and sometimes the stories just don't go together. So I guess I learned to listen to the music as well.
That's cool.
I love that idea of learning about the art of literary translation through another artistic medium. I mean, certainly in the translation of poetry, it's all about the music and the rhythm, and sound comes through in both music and literature so profoundly. So, well, I want to thank you all for your beautiful readings. We've had many comments of thanks and enjoyment, and we look forward to reading your work in print. For all of you out there watching, I want to remind you that ALTA is in the midst of ensuring that we are able to continue such programming to foster emerging translators through the mentorship program, as well as our travel fellows program. We're halfway through our fall campaign to raise $10,000 specifically for those programs that are each celebrating anniversaries, 5 years for our mentorship program, 25 years for our fellows program. So please consider making a donation. Any amount helps, from $5 to $5,000. The link is there on your on the live stream reading description. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you for those wonderful readings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.